In this video, we'll be looking at some of the most deadly creatures an average adventuring party can encounter, which are CR2. Which means that the rating in which 4 average adventurers will be able to take on at level 2. And at number 10, we have the Gibbering Mouther. This is an aberration with about 70 hit points and an incredibly slow speed of only 10 feet. Now, what makes this thing dangerous is its Bites ability, which deals 5d6 damage on hit. Now, this thing technically does have a multi-attack, but only if you use its Recharge Blinding Spittle ability, which just has a chance to blind some creatures. So the only damage it's actually dealing is its 1 Bites attack, and it's one of the hardest hitting single attack creatures at this CR level. And what's notable about the creatures that can hit really hard with a single attack, rather than it being split up amongst other abilities and a multi-attack, is the fact that if this thing crits, then it's dealing 10d6 damage, which is probably going to down a level 2 player character. And also, if it has an opportunity attack, it's going to hit much harder than pretty much anything else you encounter at that level. And its Bites attacks has a chance to knock a target prone, and also can absorb a creature into itself if it kills a target. So if your player character is only knocked unconscious by the Bites, it won't be absorbed. But with how much damage this one attack deals, there is a chance it can kill your character and then become part of its flesh. Although with how slow the Gibbering Mouther is, as it only has 10 feet of movement, it is pretty easy to just run away from it and attack at range. However, the Mouther also has 10 feet of swim speed, and in its description in the monster manual, it talks about how it can swim through mud, muck, quicksand, and dark water. So if you have some creatures in a swamp-like area, the Gibbering Mouther can just swim up right next to them and then start attacking. And then it has a couple of passive abilities as well. Aberrant Ground makes it so all ground within 10 feet of it is treated as difficult terrain. And if a creature starts its turn in the area, then they have to succeed a saving throw or their speed is 0 for the turn. And it has another ability called Gibbering, which basically, passively, uses the 4th level Confusion spell on all creatures that start their turn within 20 feet of it if they fail a Wisdom saving throw. So it can make it so your characters do nothing or run in random directions on a fail. So this thing is definitely something you don't want to be nearby at all, as almost all of its features are very short range and it can't run very fast. However, it's also really good at making sure you don't get away from it, because if it knocks you prone with its Bites attack, then its Aberrant Ground feature might keep you prone, since you can't stand up if you don't have any movement speed. So, it could overwhelm you with permanent advantage on its Bites attack, or it gives itself advantage with the Blinding Spittle, which you can use before it makes its Bites attack, in order to make sure the character is blinded. So this thing is a beast of a CR2 creature, which is easily the weakest creature on this list, because it's pretty easy to stay at range, and its 1 Bites attack doesn't really deal as much damage as pretty much everything else in the higher spots on this list. There's also some swarms which technically deal more damage than the Gibbering Mouther as well, with only 1 attack, like the swarm of giant poisonous snakes, which I believe is the hardest hitting single target melee attacker at the CR2 level. Although I don't think it's as dangerous as the Gibbering Mouther. Remember, this list is about creatures which are dangerous for parties, and not necessarily which ones deal the most amount of damage, but that definitely contributes to a creature's dangerous status. And at number 9, we have the Centaur. The Centaur are mostly good creatures, so there's not much reason for them to actually attack an average adventuring party. However, if they do, the Centaur is able to deal around 30 damage on average during its first round of combat, which is enough to take down a lot of level 2 characters. As you see, the Dungeon Master's Guide has guidelines on how much damage a CR2 creature should be able to do in 1 round of combat, and they suggest around 15 to 20 damage, which fits perfectly with the Gibbering Mouther, who deals around 17 damage on average with its Bites ability, and that's the only damage it's able to accomplish in a round. However, the Centaur does almost double this. Its Charge ability allows it to add an additional 3d6 piercing damage to its Pike attack, or around 10 more average damage, just as long as it moved at least 30 feet straight forward before it performs its attack. It also has the multi-attack feature where it can attack once with its Pike, and then another with its Hooves. Its Pike attack deals around 9 damage on average, and its Hooves ability deals around 11 damage on average. So, with all that added up, it can accomplish a theoretical 30 points of damage with its charge and multi-attack, assuming all of its attacks land. And of course, if it's able to get that full 30 feet charge, which is kind of a long charge. There are a lot of creatures which have charge-like abilities, but the second highest damaging charge of creatures in the CR2 range is only 24 damage per round. So it beats out all of its other competition pretty handily, and it's mainly because its charge feature has a 3d6 damage component, whereas most of the other ones only have a 2d8 damage increase. Plus its Hooves ability hits unusually hard, having a 2d6 damage die instead of 1d6. And if you employ some tactics, a Centaur is going to get off its charge ability a lot more often, as its pike ability has a 10-foot reach, which means you can charge with the Centaur up to a player and then stop 10 feet away in order to perform a pike attack, then move 20 feet backwards and have 30 feet of space available for your charge at your next turn, assuming the target doesn't move, all without provoking any opportunity attacks since you never get in range. This doesn't deal as much damage as also adding Hooves into the equation, since Hooves is melee range and you'd have to get closer to use it, but it is still around 19 damage on average, which is more damage than the Gibbering Mouther as well. Although the Centaur definitely requires a lot of maneuverability in order to accomplish this, as without its charge feature, it still hits harder than the Gibbering Mouther, but is nothing to really write home about, and is definitely beaten out by some of the other monsters that are higher spots in this list, even if it can technically outdamage some of them with its charge ability. And at number 8, we have the White Dragon Wyrmling. The Wyrmling is basically a baby dragon, and is like the lowest CR rating dragon a character can possibly encounter. So if you want to throw a dragon at a low level party, a Wyrmling is the way to go. And the Wyrmling which deals the most amount of damage is the White Dragon Wyrmling, as its Cold Breath ability deals 5d8 damage in a 15-foot cone, averaging out to around 22 damage per target, on a failed saving throw of course. So its Cold Breath ability hits harder than the Gibbering Mouther's Bites ability, to multiple targets instead of just one. However, it does have a recharge of 5 to 6, which means at the start of its turn it needs to roll either a 5 or 6 on a d6 in order to be able to use the ability again, so it can't spam the ability unless you're really lucky with recharging it every turn. And that's basically the tactics when it comes to playing a dragon. You want them to be able to use their breath weapon on as many targets as possible, and then position them so they can keep using it, or keep them out of range until their breath weapon recharges so they can use it again. The White Dragon Wyrmling has a really good distinction when compared to a lot of other Dragon Wyrmlings, where it actually has a 15-foot burrow speed. So, after it uses its Cold Breath, it can just go underground and then have full cover until its Cold Breath ability recharges. Then it can come up and just use it again. Alternatively, you can use its 60-foot fly speed in order to just stay out of range of all melee attacks until it can come down and use its Cold Breath again. It also has a swim speed, so it can dive after people underwater. Not all the Dragon Wyrmlings have the same kinds of speeds, and only the White Dragon has the burrow speed, and also the hardest hitting cone attack out of all the Dragon Wyrmlings. However, the Black Dragon Wyrmling can match its damage with its Acid Breath ability, but only in a 15-foot line, so it hits potentially fewer targets. There's also the Silver Dragon Wyrmling, which has two options for its breath weapons, where it can either use Cold Breath, which simply deals 1 less damage die than the White Dragons, or it can use the Paralyzing Breath, which could potentially paralyze people for up to a minute. And the paralyzed condition is really good. It could potentially disable a full party of characters. Although when it comes to pure damage and being able to hide every turn so it can recharge its hard-hitting ability, none of them could really beat out the White Dragon Wyrmling. And since this list takes into consideration how strong these creatures are against an average party, there aren't a lot of ways for the average party to have cold resistance at early levels. So it's probably going to be hitting for full damage. Whereas cold damage isn't the best kind of damage for player characters to have against monsters, it's a perfectly fine damage type for a creature to have against players. And at number 7, we have the Intellect Devourer. This is one of the tiniest creatures which will be on this list, as it's literally the size tiny, and only has 21 hit points, a low armor class of only 12, but makes its way on this list pretty easily, because it has the ability to instantly kill a player character, and the chance is pretty high too. The Intellect Devourer has a multi-attack ability, where it hits with its claws, and then it has its Devour Intellect. Claws is just some normal damage, but the Devour Intellect ability is a lot more dangerous, as it psychically assaults a creature within 10 feet, where if they fail an intelligence saving throw, they take 2d10 psychic damage, and also have an additional effect applied to them, where you roll a 3d6. Then, if the total number of that roll exceeds the target's intelligence score, then their intelligence score is reduced to 0, where they're then considered stunned until they regain at least 1 point of intelligence. Now, the average result of 3d6 is around 10, and the average intelligence of a player character is around 10, since intelligence is routinely a dump stat, meaning players rarely put any of their extra stat points into intelligence because it doesn't provide much benefits, outside of classes that use intelligence like wizard or artificers. So there is a very good chance the 3d6 will beat the average of 10 and cause a creature who fails the saving throw to devour intellect to have their intelligence reduced to 0 and be stunned. And the only way to regain the intelligence is to cast the 5th level spell Greater Restoration, or take a week of downtime and choose a relaxation ability, which allows you to restore lost ability score points. So a whole bunch of level 2 characters are not going to have the means to reverse this stun when it comes up, as you don't get 5th level spells until level 9. So, you want to be very careful to not have Devour Intellect succeed on your character, otherwise there's around a 50% chance that the second roll will succeed and reduce your intelligence to 0. Additionally, it has another ability called Body Thief, where, using a full action, it enters an intelligence contest with an incapacitated humanoid within 5 feet of it, where if it wins, it basically teleports out its brain and takes control of their body. And being stunned or unconscious counts as being incapacitated. So it basically will spam Devour Intellect until it succeeds in stunning something, then will try to steal their body, which makes it almost impossible to get that character back. Or just very difficult. Now, an intelligence contest means you basically just roll straight intelligence against the intellect of the Intellect Devourer, and it only has a +1 to its modifier, so it's not the hardest contest to win in the world, unless you just have negative intelligence modifiers. So there are a couple of checks that happen before this instant kill effect takes place. The Intellect Devourer also has resistances to all weapons except magical ones, which gives it a little bit more protection, but otherwise, ignoring its instant disable abilities, it only deals around 18 damage per average on round, which is only 1 more than the Gibbering Mouther, while also having 1/3 as much health as the Mouther. So while it is unusually deadly for its CR rating, it's mainly because of its instant kill mechanics, which do have a couple of layers of protection behind them because of all the rolls involved for any of them to resolve, which makes them a little bit easier to deal with than some of the higher spots, which just murder you with a whole bunch of damage. And at number 6, we have the Droki. This is a CR2 creature from the Out of the Abyss module, and is able to deal around 29 damage on average in its first round of combat, which is 1 less than the maximum potential of the Centaur, but has a whole bunch of other things to it which make it a lot more versatile, while being able to deal a similar amount of damage. The Droki has a short sword which is coated in a special venom, which is consumed on the first target it attacks, where if they fail a Constitution saving throw, they take an extra 3d6 poison damage, or half as much on a success. It also has a sneak attack feature, so if it has advantage on an attack, it deals an additional 2d6 damage. The short sword itself deals 1d6 plus 3 damage, and it's able to use the short sword twice with its multi-attack. So, assuming sneak attack is active, and it only deals the poison damage a single time, during the first round of combat, a Droki hits for about as much damage as a full charged Centaur. However, that's not the end of the Droki's usefulness. It's also equipped with a pair of the Boots of Speed, which on a bonus action allows it to increase its movement speed to 60 feet for 10 minutes, so it can actually move faster than a Centaur, and also makes any attack of opportunities it provokes done at disadvantage, so it's a lot more mobile too. It has the Magic Resistance trait, which gives it advantage on saving throws from spells and magical effects, which is a trait usually only found on boss monsters, and is incredibly good for survivability. Plus, is able to cast an array of spells, and of the spells it's able to cast once per day, one of them is Shatter, which is one of the hardest hitting second level AoE spells in the game, which deals 3d8 thunder damage to all targets in a 10-foot sphere, which is around 14 damage on average to each target. So, it's able to deal a whole bunch of damage in its first round of combat with its melee abilities, it's able to run away back in range thanks to its Boots of Speed, and then it can hit the party with a Shatter on its next turn, which is also really good damage. The Droki is almost a mini boss fight in of itself, and the encounter for running the Droki in its module is basically akin to trying to catch the White Rabbit, where he basically just tries to run away. And it's really good at running away with its Boots of Speed, plus being able to cast Darkness to cover its tracks. And at number 5, we have the Githzerai Monk. The Githzerai Monk is able to deal 30 damage on average, but without needing to do anything special, like getting a charge or having sneak attack active, as it's able to do all that higher than average damage with just its multi-attack alone, where it just allows it to make 2 unarmed strikes, and its unarmed strikes deal 15 damage on average each, as the first part of it hits for a full 1d8 plus 2 damage, which is the same as a Warhammer, and the second component is 2d8 psychic damage, which is like a mini Mind Blast. And then it's able to do this twice. Just one of its attacks is almost as much damage as the Gibbering Mouther's Bites ability, and a majority of that damage is psychic damage, which is rarely resisted. In addition, it's able to cast a couple of spells, including the Shield spell 3 times a day, which means it bumps up its AC to 19 3 times in a counter, which is actually an incredibly difficult AC to get over for level 2 characters. So this thing can just run in and start attacking while being very hard to hit with attack rolls, but it doesn't really have any protection to spells or other magical effects like the Droki does. Although it being able to deal more damage than the Droki easier, and also being able to have 19 AC for 3 rounds, definitely makes this a monster of a CR2 creature, which is definitely way more damage than it should be able to deal for a CR2 rating. I should note, these monsters all have unusually high damage. A majority of CR2 creatures deal less than 20 damage per round. And at number 4, we have the Triton Shorestalker. This is a CR2 creature from the Mythic Odyssey of Theros, and has a multi-attack which allows it to hit for 32 points of damage on average per round. 2 more points of damage than the Githzerai Monk, and basically in the exact same way, i.e. just using its multi-attack like normal without any special setup, as its multi-attack ability allows it to use 2 Urchin Spine Shortsword attacks. The Urchin Spine Shortsword deals an additional 3d6 poison damage with each of its hits, does not require a saving throw like the Droki's poison damage does, while doing the exact same amount of poison damage, and deals the poison damage every time you use it instead of only the first time, and just has an additional effect where if it reduces a target's hit points to 0, they're stable but poisoned for 1 hour, similar to what the Giant Centipede does. So without any other kind of setup or special abilities, the Triton Shorestalker is the hardest hitting multi-attacker in the CR2 rating. Although since its extra damage is from poison damage, there are a couple of player characters which will be immune or resistant to this type of damage, which is something to note. It also can cast a couple of niche spells, none of them as useful as something like Shatter, and has the Nimble Escape feature, which allows it to disengage as a bonus action, which means it can go in, make its multi-attack, and then disengage in order to get some range. So it's not vulnerable to a whole bunch of melee people trying to gang up on it. Although with just how much damage it's able to dish out, it probably will just down whatever attacks without needing to escape. And at number 3, we have the Quori Vessel Inspired. This is a creature from Eberron, and it's another one which deals an unusually high damage with its multi-attack, as it's able to use its Crystal Dagger twice, which deals an additional 3d6 force damage with each of its hits. Now on its own, this is only 28 damage per round on average, which is less than the previous 3 spots on this list. However, it also has a couple of spells it can cast, and one of those spells is Hex, which it can use once per day, and as part of a bonus action it can concentrate on a target it can see within range, where until the spell ends, the target takes an additional 1d6 necrotic damage every time you attack it. In addition to them having disadvantage on an ability check of a chosen type of your choice. Although the important part of Hex is that extra 1d6 damage every time you attack, because this brings up its damage per round to 35 on average, which beats out the Triton Shorestalker, as its multi-attack will proc Hex 2 times on the targets it uses on, which adds an additional 2d6 damage, and it already hits really hard with its multi-attack, especially since almost all of that damage is very rarely resisted. The dagger deals a whole bunch of force damage. I don't think there's a player character which can innately resist force damage without some kind of magic item, or at least especially not at level 2. And the great thing about Hex is that once a target reaches 0 hit points, you can just move it to a new target. So the Quori Vessel basically has Hex for the entire encounter, or until it loses concentration. In addition, it has passive advantage to Wisdom saving throws thanks to its Dual Mind feature, so it has some protection against spells, and is able to cast a handful of other really good spells, like Charm Person or Hold Person. In fact, those are really good spells to cast on player characters, especially Hold Person. They can also randomly cast the 4th level spell Arcane Eye 3 times a day, although it doesn't really help it out in combat and just makes it really good at spying on your party. It also has slightly more average health than the previous 5 spots on this list, only being out by the Centaur and Gibbering Mouther, while also having Mage Armor, so it has 15 AC, which is 2 higher than the average in the CR2 rating. So, with a little bit of protection from spells thanks to Dual Mind and its Psychic resistance, slightly higher health and AC than average, and dealing way more damage than all the other multi-attackers thanks to its Hex, the Quori Vessel is a very dangerous creature to throw against a party of level 2 characters, and would probably be the number 1 on this list if it wasn't for the first 2 spots, both being able to cast really good spells. And at number 2, we have the Lizardfolk Shaman. This is a lizard man which is able to cast a couple of spells and is treated as a 5th level spellcaster. And one of the spells it can cast is the 3rd level spell Conjure Animals. However, it can only summon reptile creatures. And what do you know? The giant poisonous snake is a reptile, and easily one of the best creatures you can summon with Conjure Animals anyway. So if you just choose the option to summon 8 giant poisonous snakes, with each of the snakes able to deal 16 damage per round, this turns your Lizardfolk Shaman's 1 spell cast into a potential 128 damage per round with all of the snake attacks, which is about 4 times more damage than the previous spot on this list, which already is pretty high damage for its CR rating. Being able to dish out over 125 points of damage in 1 round by itself is equivalent to a CR 20 creature's average damage, which would turn going against a Lizardfolk Shaman into a very deadly encounter. Although, surprisingly enough, not an impossible encounter, because Conjure Animals requires concentration. So if you simply break the Shaman's concentration, or just ignore the snakes and kill the Shaman, then all of the snakes disappear. It is able to cast Conjure Animals 2 times before it runs out of its spell slots, but it only has 27 HP on average, which is only around average for its CR rating, and doesn't really have any way to protect itself while using Conjure Animals, besides maybe turning it into a crocodile with its shape change feature, and just restraining things with its bite. However, if you don't want to just summon a whole bunch of giant poisonous snakes in order to wipe out a party, you could instead just summon 1 swarm of poisonous snakes, 4 crocodiles, or 2 Deinonychuses, as I'm pretty sure dinosaurs are considered reptiles in D&D. And at number 1, we have the Priest of Mephistopheles. Now, there are a lot of Diabolic cult variants of creatures from the Monster Manual in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, which basically add or replace certain traits to just baseline creatures, and so this one is the CR2 creature Priest, just the Diabolic cult of Mephistopheles variant, which is definitely the strongest one, and probably the strongest CR2 creature in the game. And the reason is because it gains a couple of additional spells from its cult, including the 3rd level spell Fireball, which it's able to cast 2 times with its spell slots. Now, Fireball is the hardest hitting 3rd level spell in the game, tied only with Lightning Bolt and damage, but can hit a lot more targets and more easily, and deals 8d6 fire damage to all targets within a 20-foot radius, which is about 28 damage on average to every target hit, or like a Droki's full first round of combat damage on every target. And with such a huge radius, the Priest can easily hit the entire party with the Fireball, and so if everyone fails their saving throw, then the Priest can take out a full party of level 2 players in its first turn with just 1 ability. However, the Priest also has a couple of other benefits it gains from its Diablo cult, where it also gains the Spell Shield feature, where it has advantage on saving throws against spells, and also, if it does succeed a saving throw against a spell, it gains temporary hit points equal to the level of that spell, which just makes it that much harder to kill. And if it has the Leader variant, it gains the Spell Leech ability, where as a bonus action it can steal one of its ally spell slots, but only of the lowest level spell, so it probably won't be able to recharge its Fireball. Now, it's able to do a couple of other niche things like heal and to deal extra damage every turn with its spiritual weapon, but it's definitely just having the ability to use Fireball that puts it at the number 1 spot on this list, as Fireball is just an incredibly powerful ability for a low-level spellcaster to have, and is generally not on CR2 creatures. And the only reason the Priest is higher than the Lizardfolk Shaman is because it's able to deal its ridiculous amount of damage without requiring concentration, as you can counter the Lizardfolk Shaman by just making it drop its concentration before all the snakes get their turn to deal damage. However, the Priest will be able to do all of its damage immediately as soon as its turn starts, and there's no counterplay you can really do besides just using a counterspell. So if you really want to throw a very deadly creature at your players at 2nd level, you can probably wipe the entire group with just a single Priest of Mephistopheles, without having to keep track of 8 giant poisonous snakes, as the Lizardfolk Shaman could also easily wipe out an entire group of level 2 players. Alright, and that's the list. I'll probably continue going over all the dangerous low CR monsters until I get to the CR5 creatures, in which case I'll probably stop there. So, if there are any other super dangerous CR2 creatures that I might have missed, do you think the Intellect Devourer should be higher on this list because it has a chance to insta-kill players? Or do you just have ideas for future videos just like this one? If so, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments. And also, remember to don't not subscribe.